Another episode of. Buddy, we're supposed to be in sync. Like, you're supposed to jump right up.
I don't know the name of the podcast.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Welcome to another podcast, another episode of The Art of Existence.
The Art of Existing.
Welcome to another episode of
The Art of Existing.
with
Mackenzie Wolf.
and Alexander Wolf. I wanted to talk about something that I've been. Oh, take your time. Ouch.
You all right?
Yeah, that I've been thinking about, which is religion in the, like, I want to go full blown. Like, just give me your thoughts. Like, religion in the workplace. And I'm not talking about the legalities and all that kind of stuff. I feel sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I feel like I'm holding back a little and not being completely, like, I'll give you an example. Last week or a week before that, I was at a shoot with a client, and we were just waiting in the boardroom with his client that hired them. I was filming for them. We were filming a setup for them, and out of nowhere, he's like, "What do you think about what's going on in like a political place? Something that's going on with a war?" And it threw me first. I'm like, "What?" He's like, I've never thought about talking like that, talking about those subjects with a client.
That I wouldn't recommend.
That I wouldn't recommend. But then he went into the the religious. He's not a religious person, but like he was saying, like, oh, he was in Switzerland and he was, you know, it's a very Catholic place, and he just odd. I found it odd that he brought it up. He brought up religion in a work environment. I had no issue with it because I love to talk about religion, and he wasn't being rude or anything. He was being like inquisitive. And it made me think, how many other people are censoring themselves because they're Christians and they don't want to, they feel like other people are uncomfortable talking about Christianity or religion? Mm-hmm. And what's that about?
I think it's less about people feeling like they don't want to make other people uncomfortable, and I think people are just genuinely uncomfortable talking about their own faith. Because the church as it is right now doesn't equip us to talk about our faith, and it doesn't equip us to have answers to questions, like even commonly asked, like things that might come up and once you start talking about faith with somebody. So I think people are shy to even start the conversation. It's not about like I might offend somebody. I'm sure that there might be part of that for some people, but for most people, I think it's literally like, I don't know how to articulate my faith, and so I'm not going to open that box because I'm embarrassed.
To be put in the spot of like, well, see, you don't know, or
like, because it's very uncomfortable if somebody asks you like, well, why do you believe that? If you don't have an answer to that question because you haven't actually dug deep enough for it, or maybe you haven't been given the proper vocabulary or like whatever, then why would you start that conversation that you don't have the answers to? And it just makes you look stupid. And then like it just justifies people questioning the faith even more. So I think people are more like embarrassed of their own knowledge maybe, or something like that more than they're like afraid to offend somebody. So it comes from an
insecurity of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, very few religious people in Canada hold what would be considered offensive religious views. So I don't know that people are really...
Offensive? What do you mean?
Like, some people might be like, oh, I don't talk about my faith in the workplace because I don't want to offend somebody.
Oh, because maybe I'm a very radical on what I believe?
Yeah, but I would say that that's a very small portion of religious Canadians. And for the most part, you have people who fall into like a pretty like middle place in terms of their views and stuff like that. So I think it's less about not wanting to offend people and more about I don't have the answers, or I haven't been given the tool set to talk about the faith. Because like nobody taught you growing up like, oh, this is how you should have a conversation about religion. If somebody asks you this, you could answer this way. Right. That's why it's like that kind of dialogue, like when I'm teaching teenagers, is important to me to give them that language and that ability to answer questions. I don't know, like if somebody's like giving answers to questions like, oh, well, why would you go to church on Sunday if you, like, isn't going to church on Sunday antiquated? Like, can't I just connect with God whenever I want from home? Can't I just do like my prayer thing or my meditation from home or whatever like that? I would hope that the kids that I've taught would be like, actually, there's something deeper to going to church. There's something that shapes the mind about physically, like getting yourself up and going to a place of worship is actually an act of worship in itself. Something about, you know, I hope they would have an answer about community, serving one another in community. I hope they would have an answer about the meaningfulness of taking communion and how you can't do that from home. Those are all like kind of seeds that I've shared with them that answer a question like, why would you still go to church on Sunday when you can just connect with God from home?
Yeah, because I even remember myself when, like, let's say like 23, 22-ish, going to church on Christmas night, you know, like 24th at night, and saying and having a discussion with people like, well, God's everywhere. Like, why would we go to church? Like, doesn't mean anything. Like, God is everywhere. It's in every house, God's house, and blah, blah, blah. But it obviously, like, I know different now. Like, my views have changed, but it's a very fair question and doubt even. Obviously, I thought I was a know-it-all and come out of like arrogance and ignorance, bad combo there. Yeah.
I think like that's the type of question that somebody could reasonably, like if you say to somebody at work, like somebody's like, oh, what's your plan for the weekend? Like, what are you up to this weekend? And you're like, oh, you know, well, it's gonna be a quiet weekend, but you know, it'll be a busy Sunday. Like we always go to church on Sunday or something like that. People, I think, keep that to themselves less like because they think somebody will be offended to hear that they go to church on Sunday, and more because they literally don't have an answer because somebody naturally is going to be like, oh, you go to church every Sunday? Like, I just don't get that, right? Which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Like you're saying, lots of people think that way. And so then they feel like they might have to have a justification for their participation in corporate worship, and maybe they feel like they don't have the words for it, or maybe they haven't even actually thought to themselves, what is important to me about going to church on Sunday? Right. Because maybe it's something they inherited from family. Like it's like, you know what I mean? Like, well, I go because my mom goes. It's really important to my mom. And I never thought twice about it.
It's more ritualistic and not so spiritual.
Maybe they haven't really actually thought about why they do it or why it's important. And so to have somebody push them on it actually shakes, why do I go?
You know what, something else I was thinking about is right now it feels like religion and Christianity, let's stick to Christianity because we're Christians, I don't want to talk about another religion. It feels like Christianity is being attacked a lot out of like people that are atheists, people like the government, like a lot of people. It just feels like the religion itself of Christianity in Canada is being attacked and not at a place of respect. It's not in its heyday. Like it doesn't feel like it's at a peak. It feels like it's calming down.
Christendom's over, big guy.
So my question is, why do you say that? And my question is, has Christianity, because I've started thinking like, well, I'm just living the experience that I have. What about past experiences? But Christianity's always been in the down. It's never had its heyday. When did it have its heyday? It's always been.
I mean, no, it had its heyday for a good 2,000.
Because the persecution of Christians has been forever.
Yeah, but in the West, it's been the main like religious and political force
for 100 years, maybe? Not even?
No, for 1,000 years, maybe.
In the West?
Yeah.
1,000 years?
In England and Western Europe and all those places.
I thought you were talking North America.
In North America, I mean, the people who came and founded North America took over.
400 years, maybe max?
They were.
But they were
Christians.
The minority when they arrived.
Not really. I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Minority to who?
To the people that were already here.
But they conquered in a lot of ways. So
yeah.
They didn't remain the minority.
I mean, I guess you could say
maybe they were the population minority, but they still had the upper hand politically, socially.
Mexico, let's say in Mexico when I'm not too familiar with the times.
I'm talking more like Canada and the US because I don't know a lot of Mexican history, but when the Spanish came, they came and they took.
It took a while. Like they came, I don't know. This is from the videos and stuff that I've heard, like I've watched, but like they came twice, once, and they were basically kicked out and almost killed off, but they left smallpox and like Western European viruses. And the second time they came, the population was like 90%.
Like the Mayan population.
Mayan, Aztec, all the little tribes everywhere were just dead. And I mean, 90%. They said crazy kind of stuff. So that helped to conquer. But yeah, anyway, like, yeah, it feels like a little bit like Christianity is at a...
I think it began losing its like social and political power in the last 60 years. Before that, in the Western world, it's been in power a long, long time. But the thing is, there's a difference between, like, to me, the best thing for the church is for Christendom to die. Like, Christendom is, by what I mean by Christendom is like when the church and was like had political power. So like, you know, in Canada and the US and in a lot of Europe and England, obviously, all those things. But so it had its heyday politically. I mean, obviously, right? We see that they had the influence, like in England, they literally were like completely tied to the monarchy, and in a lot of Europe, like the complete influence on lawmaking, on all those things, right? Funding, like all money, how money moved, all that stuff. And then obviously that like European settlement in what's Canada and the US was the same, right? But they may have had political power, but the church itself, like the people had a very corrupt form of Christianity, right? Because it was based on like domination and power and all those things, which are at the end of the day very opposite to the actual Christian ethic, right? So the best thing for the church moving forward, yeah, obviously our churches are smaller. There's less people in them, like the influence of Christianity on lawmaking, things like that has very significantly declined. But I think the people who fill the churches are not there out of obligation, they're there out of true faith. So actually the church is becoming more and more
devout,
and more they actually align with the ethic of the Bible, of Christianity itself. And I mean, that will just, to me, that means the church will grow eventually. Yeah.
So when maybe it's heyday in the sense of true believers and true followers of like the teachings, it's not when it's mixed into culture, let's say culture, because culture, not law, like
politics
is part of
society.
Culture. Yeah. So like when it is not mixed into culture, because then it's part of culture.
Then it's obligation, ritual.
Exactly. Like, oh, we do this every Sunday, but they don't have like the depth behind it. So you're saying it mostly shines when it is oppressed, and it is when it is down and underdog.
I think so. So we hold too tightly to this ideal that the church is, or like that Christianity, that is the prevailing cultural religion and stuff like that. But that was never, like, I just don't think that that's really what we're up to. That's not really the goal of Christianity. So to me, like, that is a goal that when we hold too tightly to, we completely lose like true meaning.
You told me this a while ago, that one of the places that has the most new Christians are places like China.
Yeah, a lot of places where Christianity, that's always how it's been, right? Like Christianity began as an oppressed movement, when Jesus, I mean, they literally hung Jesus. Like they literally they corporately killed him, right? As a criminal. So it's like that, we always lose sight of that, right? Because of the church's history of power and domination. But all over the world where Christianity is like most oppressed or most minority, that's where the church has grown most authentically, right? Because the people who are Christians in those places, they're like literally willing to die for the faith. Like you can't be more faithful than them. So that's where, I mean, not to over spiritualize it, that's where the Spirit is, that's where the Spirit moves, right? It's going to be amongst the most faithful. So the church grows in its most authentic form in those places. Plus, in those places, the risks that come with like big churches, like mega church pastors who gain a bunch of power, get super greedy, corrupt, inter-church fighting, all that kind of stuff that we struggle with in the church in like Canada and the US and stuff like that, they can't possibly be bothered with it. If you're literally running a church underground in China or in the Middle East or somewhere like this, like Turkey has a lot of underground churches. First of all, there's no such thing as a mega church because you're literally meeting in secret, or you're meeting in very small settings. And so that pretty much stops any temptation for power. And then like the infighting is just not, you have to stick together.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously we don't live in those settings, so those are like idealistic views of it, maybe, probably. But at the end of the day, I think they are like base at its baseline. That
And depending on the culture that you live in, I bet you that all the beliefs and all the rituals are slightly like accents, you know, a little bit different. I'm sure that Christianity in China is a little more communistic, you know?
Probably not. You'd be surprised because the church ultimately, like, people plant churches overseas and like
The
mostly
missionaries,
I
bring their
think
belief.
they often bring their own.
Because Christianity in Mexico is mixed with a lot of the occult, kind of like, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but
Superstition.
a lot of superstition, and like, and it all came down from like the tribes, not just Aztecs, but like all the different tribes and the weird stuff that they would do. And
Roman Catholicism has always been more superstitious though, so that may also have been the
Okay.
Spanish, an influence of the Spanish.
okay.
And like, that was one of the main criticisms of like the reforming churches was about superstition. Like, they were relying more on superstition than on faith. So, I mean, I think Catholicism lends itself to superstition more than, like, in a lot of different ways. But yeah, superstition and all those things, they become localized for sure. But I don't know, yeah, it just depends. Obviously, the influences are gonna be different. I mean, you're gonna have different like social ethics. Like if you meet at a church, like even when we go to the church, the Spanish speaking church, the etiquette is different. What people wear, they might dress a little bit more formal. When they come in, they're kissing one another. That's like, it's because they're Latinos, so they're kissing each other, but like you would never show up to my church and to start kissing people as a way of greeting them. It's very odd, right? Because it's a bunch of white people, and white people don't kiss each other when they say hello, right? You wouldn't even hug somebody on a Sunday usually. Like you might like do like a side hug scenario, but like you watch, if you look around on Sunday, people are like, you know, they go in for a kiss as soon as you see them and stuff like that. So it's like, you're gonna see those kind of like localized behaviors. Or even like, yeah, you'll see people more dressed up maybe at the Spanish church because, again, it's just cultural.
Yeah.
So there are cultural influences on the way Christianity is shaped, but for the most part,
At its core, it's kind of hard to, unless you're going really askew. And
yeah, it's pretty standardized
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
then how can you, because we're talking about in the beginning, how can you, the people that maybe don't have those conversations at work or just with friends, let's just even get work out of the subject, just like with friends that aren't religious, how can you feel more comfortable speaking about your faith? Because I feel like it's a little bit of a shame, and that you shouldn't have it. The hardest time, when I have the hardest time and I feel like all my problems are coming on top of me, and I can't handle anymore, and I'm like, okay, this is so much pressure. The only one thing that helps and relieves almost like instantly the pressure like this, and it's always remembering about Christ and Jesus and God and thinking he can handle my burden, because I start feeling like about death, about just like so many problems in the world and everything that needs to be done, like just like everything kind of starts piling on top. And then I remember, oh, it's not just me, you know, like God can help, God can take off. I don't have to rely everything on me. I'm not the deity, like I'm not the everything that has to fix everything, you know, like, and that relieves my pressure instantly. And it's always like, I always have to remember, like, oh yeah, like I always forget.
But if people are not feeling confident to share at work,
Yes.
or like just share their faith with
I
others.
feel like it's harder when you feel ashamed not to talk about it in your daily life. If you don't make it part of your daily life, it's hard to keep remembering, or like only when you have an issue or when you're at your worst, then you remember your faith and you remember God?
I would think I would remember kind of two things. The first one is that people generally are fascinated by religion. Like they're not offended, they're fascinated. So I think obviously unless you're like coming into conversations like with the intention to be like,
yeah, you're a heathen. Or
yeah, like to get into an uncomfortable conversation, then you're gonna find yourself in those conversations. But like for the most part, I mean, for example, like one of the weirdest things for me is that people always, everywhere you go, ask you what you do for work. And I can't avoid starting a religious conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't even remember going like recently to a massage and the lady's like, what do you do for work? And I'm like, you know, it's awkward because I'm like kind of in the nude, right? And I'm like, you don't want to hear this right now. Or even like the last time I saw the physiotherapist, she asked me the same thing, what do you do for work, right? And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm training to be a minister, you know, I'm a preacher. And people are fascinated by that. Nobody's offended by that, right? People are curious and they want to share with you. And people will say to me like, all of a sudden when I say that, they start telling me like their whole religious background, like it's almost like they need to.
Yeah.
People will be like, oh, well, you know, I haven't been to church in a long time. And I'm like, that's okay, I didn't ask. Like, you don't worry, we don't keep attendance, you know? And they're like, but my grandma is Catholic and, you know, I like to go at Christmas. And they want, like, they have a curiosity that's inside them. So I would feel like unless you go into a conversation trying to offend people, it's actually pretty hard to offend people by just sharing what you believe. And people actually enjoy those conversations from what and you can read social cues really quickly if somebody does not want to talk about religion, right? So like it has happened to me before where somebody's like, oh, what do you do for work? It's like, oh, I'm a preacher. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. And it's obvious they do not want to go there, right? And then that's the end of it. But more like 9 times out of 10, it leads to really interesting conversations, right? Very fruitful conversations. So I would just say like, don't go into it thinking people don't want to talk about it, because I think they actually do. And the second thing is like, just don't feel like you have to have an answer to whatever they ask you. Like even myself, I feel that pressure, especially because it's like, I should have most of the answers. Like literally it's my job to have the answers, right? But if people ask you something and you're not even sure, like you can share that with them and be like, no, I think you might have a misconception that I'm supposed to have it figured out just because I go to church. Actually, I go to church because I don't have it figured out. I'm trying to figure it out. That's the whole thing I'm doing there, right? Mm-hmm. So people often think that if you claim to be religious, it's because you see yourself as a moral, like on a higher moral ground. But like the whole purpose of Christianity is repentance, right? So it's like, actually, my declaration of my Christianity is me saying, I don't have it figured out. So, and I can't figure it out on my own. So if people, I kind of maybe would share, if somebody's really pushing you like, oh, well, I have these questions for you and you don't seem to have the answers. I mean, lean on that, right? And people would just find that more and more authentic, because that's what they connect with, is authenticity. My experience, like spiritually, is that like God wants, like relationships, like God moves between relationships and conversation. So like God will never use you by keeping you quiet usually. You know what I mean? More often than not, like when you have a really interesting conversation, that is, God can use you to kind of like lay seeds for people they go home thinking like, oh, it's so weird. Like I've had people say to me like, you know, I never knew women could be ministers, right? For example. Mm-hmm. And then somebody, the second time I'll see them, they're like, oh, after I went home, like I was just thinking about, I realized like I don't know a lot about Christianity, because like what I thought I knew was that like you had to be a single man to be a minister, and like it sparked curiosity in them, right? So, and curiosity, I mean, that's the hook.
But I think with that comes the insecurity, like we're saying, of knowledge, of not having enough information, not knowing enough, and being put in a situation where you're uncomfortable and can't answer something, and you don't feel like an authority. Because I feel like when you talk with most confidence and most comfortable is when you know a subject. Mm-hmm. And if I just keep using myself an example, like I was born a Catholic. We didn't go to church too much in Mexico. Like, I mean, my mom was a single mom she had enough worries than going, pushing us to go to church on Sunday. Once in a while we would, but even when we came to Canada, she tried with those different churches, the carpet churches with carpet, very weird for Mexicans. But I didn't know anything. And we started going to church. I started going to church and I still didn't know anything. Like, really.
You have to seek and find it on your own.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So for you to be, I don't want to categorize it, but what's a good Christian? Maybe we can go into that, but like, I wasn't an educated Christian, but just going to church doesn't educate you.
No.
You might think it does, like, oh, I go to church, I know a lot. No, like just going to church on Sunday or it doesn't educate you. That's the hardest thing for me. Like if you're, like we were talking, it's a lot more ritualistic in the Catholic Church. So we go there and a lot of the things that are saying, like, you don't follow up. You can go through the book, those are the Psalms.
The hymnals.
The hymns, but nobody really teaches you in the Catholic Church.
I don't think they really teach you in any church.
Unless you're joining a group, like a Bible
study,
like that. And that's the hardest part, because if you're just going to Sunday and you think you're checking the box, I'm a good Christian, but you don't know anything.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's happening when they hold up the what's in English, hostia, the Eucharist. You don't know anything.
I think the responsibility of Christian life is two parts. It's corporate worship, which is what you would call Sunday, like communal worship, and it's private devotion and study, right? So you're going to get that depth of knowledge from private devotion and study that is going to enrich and feed your be the source for your communal worship. There's two parts to it. There's communal worship. There's the act of coming together and giving thanks. And then there's private study and devotion. And private study and devotion can happen in a group setting. Like you said, you might get into a Bible study or something like that and learn from other people. You might take a class, you might do that, or you might study it on your own. But corporate worship is we call, Eucharist means Thanksgiving, right? So it's the great Thanksgiving. You're there to give thanks. You're not there to, it's not a course. You're not there to study, right? You're there to take all the spiritual indwelling from your private and personal devotion and study and lift it up and as a community, right? And bring it together and apply it together. So people just hold worship to be corporate worship to be the end all and be all. That's what it is that's what Christian life is. But that's not really the intention of a worship service, is to educate you.
Right.
Yeah. So you can't really expect that.
When I started to learn, it was just literally when I started listening to Bible in a Year with Dr. Schmitty.
Father Mike Schmidt.
Yeah. And I guess that's, because he just reads the Bible and then he reads I think they're chronologically kind of picking stories to read you the whole Bible in 1 year. And he adds his, breakdown at the end. And I guess that's what a lot of people are missing, reading the Bible, plain and simple, right? You're not supposed to understand. The hard part would be understanding it, but that's why you read it multiple times and you never stop reading it.
Yeah, and you read it with supplemental stuff. You read it with, and then you read a study that goes with it, or you read it and you go to a Bible study where somebody else is helping to break it down with you and stuff like that.
Right, because I remember when your grandma or your dad was giving you you were picking up some Bibles from your grandparents, and your grandfather was it your granddad? Had a little,
my great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather had a little pocket Bible, this big.
Yeah, pocket New Testament.
And then it didn't look like it was just being carried or just got it. It looked like he'd been going through it, and he had it in his pocket, going to work, and actually going through it and studying. And where's that today, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, that's what the sermon is for in the, but it's just, that's supposed to be the instruction part. But it's still difficult to comprehend a sermon if you're not really prepared to hear it for the most part. And Catholic sermons are 5 minutes, they're homilies. Whereas if you went to what you would call a carpet church, you might have a 45-minute sermon. So those churches, their corporate worship is set up to more like an educational session, but still you kind of need some base knowledge when you go there. So you can't, I think it's about responsibility, right? You can't expect that in 1 hour a week, you're going to have this like incredible relationship with God and with other people. It's like 0% investment.
Yeah.
Like literally to spend 45 minutes a week dedicated to your spiritual life. And then you're like, oh, well, I've checked the spiritual box. Like, why am I not at peace? Why do I not understand? Why do I not comprehend? It can't be that. Like, it's not that way, right? Like, imagine we only invested 1 hour a week into our marriage. Like, we wouldn't have a marriage, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't know anything about you.
And
You
I think the one example that made it made more the most sense that has ever had towards me in my mind for understanding the relationship with God, when they compare it to marriage. The relationship between your spouse is the way that your relationship with God should be. Can you go into that?
Well, I think like even from like the Old Testament, there's like often it's like this example of like the people of God is the bride and like God is the groom, right? And it's like it was often used as a metaphor for unfaithfulness, because the people of God were always unfaithful, and it was like God was this faithful spouse, ever loving, ever giving, ever forgiving, and the people continually were unfaithful by worshiping other gods or by turning their back on God, right? And then ideally in the Christian church we have like the inverse of that, which is now we have the opportunity at a faithful marriage to God, which is like, you know, where we receive all of God's love, all of God's forgiveness, all of God's giving, and we ideally in return show faithfulness. Like we're enabled by like through Jesus to give faithfulness back to God, right? But I think in terms of marriage, like when we were preparing to get married and I read a lot of stuff about marriage, a lot of the stuff I read talked about like marriage being like a schoolhouse for holiness, right? Because there's no one else in your life that you are so tied to that you have the chance to show the kind of love that God shows us, if that makes sense. So like there's nobody else who's around you more and more involved in your life to the point that you have the most opportunities to show mercy and forgiveness and love and grace and to serve them like more than they deserve. Well, firstly, I would say that a lot of people resent that imagery for marriage because it often gets projected onto the wife. So a lot of people will be like, well, that's just like basically like a way to get you to be a docile wife who puts up with her husband and forgives him for everything and serves him always. But that's not the way the scripture lines it out. That may have been the way that it's worked out in history of marriage, right? Like even the scripture itself, it talks about like that's like it's supposed to be the two-way street, the way that it is with God and with us, right? So I mean, an example, I mean,
like we said,
everything you do is like
being
everything
there
you do
for
is serving
another person, like doing things for that person, being understanding of their issues or their problems and supporting them, loving them through their hardships, being there for them, being understanding to the point of dying for them.
It's everything,
right?
like it's
to the point of dying for them.
Yeah, I mean, but it works itself out in the domestic world, right? Like it's literally, it's the realm of like laundry and driving people places and putting up with each other's families and, you know, being patient with each other's flaws. Like that's how it gets worked out. It's like very mundane and very domestic. I mean, obviously there's those huge moments in life where you get the opportunity to either come through for somebody on something huge or not, right? But those moments are generally few and far between, like, you know what I mean? Like obviously those moments come, like, but it's more like about every day. Just a lot of the modern concept of marriage is so focused on me. Like, are you who I need? Can you be what I need? That type of like finding the one for me is like, it's all very self-focused, and that's always a recipe for like a failed marriage, right? Like marriage is never about yourself, right? It's always about the other. And if my marriage is always about you and your marriage is always about me, it's a great marriage. But if my marriage is about me and your marriage is about you, we have a lot of trouble like coming, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with God. Like that's what it is working out with God.
Helped me understand like God's love for us, or the relationship that we should have with God. Like,
Yeah.
because it's the Bible is brilliant, right? On like how it breaks down things so us dumb folks could understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else can we understand than in a relationship, our marriage, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what's brilliant. So yeah, I think if you want to learn more, probably start listening to the Bible in a year.
Yeah,
what else is better than
I
that?
would recommend it. It's such a good resource for people who are starting from nowhere.
And it's audiobook.
I'd tell it to everybody
Like
because
it's like podcast form. It's so
you
easy.
learn so much, and it's designed for people who are starting from nowhere. So it's like super easy. Or even watching the Bible Project stuff online. They have really great stuff on YouTube. It's just literally, it's just about time. Like you dedicate time every day to learning, like even spending half an hour learning about the Bible, like that you're gonna learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously, right? And you have to invest in your relationship with God. That never falls. Like
Just like you would invest in a relationship with your spouse.
yeah, or with anybody else, right?
Date night.
This is what Alex considers date night. I'm pretty sure I'm working.
Okay, let's throw in some real estate so we can call this a real estate podcast.
I don't know anything about real estate. What do you do if you find bugs in your bed asking for a friend?
Not those type of bed bugs. I was thinking on the drive here because we were driving down that street and I saw that old school, like old private school on the left when we're driving.
Okay.
You don't know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I just got confused because it's still a private school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm saying, and I was thinking, what is the worst like non-house building that you could convert into a house? What would be like the
A
worst?
hospital.
Oh fuck yeah! I was thinking that because you know how we've seen, and I think it was a trend for a while, like turning churches into like
Yeah, because churches were selling. They were trying to sell their properties with money.
churches were being converted into like apartment units, and some of them were pretty nice and like cool because all the old stuff. And so I was thinking, like, what's the worst thing they can turn into like housing?
A hospital for sure.
100%.
Even if you clear the land and build like
It
from
is
scratch,
like-
it's like
If you don't believe in ghosts, geez.
you're gonna start.
Oh, like I'm chicken skin right now, man. Like I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
I, honest
so
to God,
creepy.
would rather.
Oh.
I would rather build on top of a cemetery.
I mean, where isn't a dead body buried?
I mean, there's that. There's definitely that.
So like a couple more recents, I guess.
That's what a lot of people don't understand about those church homes. There's usually a lot
If it's
of
an old, because I was
cremated
thinking
remains and
a lot of
churches.
older churches. Because I was thinking, in Mexico, you can't find anywhere where like bodies not buried, or it's not like maybe new developments are fine, but like
Bienvenida a Punta Cana.
you know, like there isn't like an older home that's at least 100 years old
No,
that
for
used to
sure.
be a hospital or something for the Civil War in Mexico. Like it's just like,
But a hospital just holds a
Ooh.
lot of ick.
damn it. Which the master bedroom? Like the OR?
Ugh,
ER?
don't
Like
even-
the operating room?
I mean, if you like it cold at night, you might like the morgue.
You like some ghostly fingers trickling in your hair?
And I'm the most comfortable with death in hospitals. Like, I'm at that end of the scale, man. Like, and I freaks me
Heck
out.
no. What'd be the best?
Maybe, well, it's like a dream world, but like if there was like a botanical gardens that was gonna close.
Okay, like an old school, like British, you know, where they
haven't
would
you
do
been to
the
the
old
botanical
walking and they
gardens?
do like their courting and you'd see like the
Yeah,
orchid that
but-
only bloomed for half an hour in
Yeah.
the moonlight or something.
like old botanical gardens. Usually they have like beautiful buildings with like a bit of art and stuff inside, and then they have the like outdoor area with
A
all
little
the flowers.
tiny home in the middle of the botanical garden. You know what I'm talking?
Or yeah, in terms of converting, that's probably the coolest. Yeah.
I'm not saying possible, I'm saying coolest. Another worse one.
I don't know, like a jail.
Oh, dude, who would? I mean, I wouldn't leave it up to the politicians to convert some
Or a
jails.
funeral home.
Oh, people live in funeral homes though. I remember in Brussels,
Yeah.
one of my like school friends,
His parents own the funeral home.
her parents owned the funeral home, and she said that a lot of people like to sleep over because they're like, oh, can we see a dead body or something?
Yeah.
And obviously the parents were like,
It's like a rectory, right? It's the
and it's like kind of like
situation.
stuck together. And
Yeah.
like, you can connect.
Yeah, but I mean, like that is what it is. Like that's the family biz. But I mean, if it's like a funeral home that's been converted into a regular home,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But obviously, like I mean, especially before
Oh man, I don't know. I'm kidding.
most people who own a funeral home live at the funeral home or like attached to it or nearby because calls come at all hours of the night. You have to be able to get in the hearse and go.
Cremation is booming, brother. Keep the fire burning.
No.
Oh. Well, it's hot, so they can get it going. I'm sure it takes time to get it prepped.
Ryan started the fire.
What? Ryan started the fire? One last one. What would be the coolest but most inconvenient place to convert into housing? I feel like
Go ahead.
an aquarium. Because you have to keep all
Yeah.
those fishes alive.
But-
And there's a lot of pumps, there's a lot of water, a lot of cleaning. So it's like constant
And you know
work.
me, I'm an aquarium girl. That's what they say.
Yeah.
But
Imagine going in there
an
and pulling out a
abandoned
dead
aquarium
shark,
is creepy, terrifying.
A dead shark. Like,
There's something about being in the open water though.
it's not
we
open
have
water.
Kids. We can't have kids.
Like a lot of drownings, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I would want to. Yeah, but I see what you're saying. That would be cool.
But do they do like overnights, like sleepover?
Yes.
Okay, go down there.
Immediately, yes. Yeah, they do.
They actually do that?
I think so. You can go there like on a school trip and like stay overnight.
What about adults?
Or I don't know.
I'll never know.
I guess we'll know. I guess you're gonna find out for our anniversary, which is just a couple months away.
Other than that?
I don't know. Aquarium, yeah, I could see, but I just see it going wrong really fast. Maybe like an arcade. Because you get rid of the room that has like the weird like games, but you keep like a few cool
but you
games.
have
You
to
have a
keep-
bowling alley.
If you're converting, like you can't just empty it out as a room. It's like you have to keep the vibe. You have to keep the style.
Yeah, but you don't have to keep every single thing.
Like you have to put a bed in the middle somewhere, not touch anything.
Yeah, but it would be cool if there's like a bowling alley and like pool tables. Like you could have a cool like bachelor house that was an arcade, like a converted arcade.
Right.
Plus, it probably has like a fountain thing.
They usually don't have any windows, so it's gonna be dark.
I could do with less light.
Okay, last one. Where? Now that I always ask this question. I love it. 1 week zombie apocalypse you get to spend there.
He asks this every week, man.
Trying to see where you at.
Yeah.
You gotta survive 1 week, and you gotta have fun, right? Because the world's shit. Like it's gone to shit. So like you have to spend 1 week. Well, I don't know what happens at the end of the week, but you just have to spend 1 week.
You gotta hanker down.
Yeah, for 1 week, hang
I'm
out.
going to a Walmart, big guy.
For a week?
Yes, there's like couch or something that I can lay on, or like a Hudson's Bay or something. No, Walmart's better because there's still like there's chips and everything. I'm thinking food. I'm thinking places to lay down. I'm thinking activities. The place is filled with books and puzzles.
But
and
usually those
games.
books are like those like.
I know your
whodunit.
answer, which is the movies, and there's nobody to run the movie, senor, and nobody to make your fresh popcorns.
A teenager with one
there's
eye
no
can
hot
do it. I can
dogs.
do it. Those hot dogs are gonna be around somewhere in a shelf.
Yeah, but you don't want to know where the sausage is made. You need a hot dog served to you, not like you make it. I don't know. I just think you have like a remnant, like you have this idea of living in the movie theater during the apocalypse, and I just think you would hate it. And I think you're gonna be calling
But it's
me
1
and being
week.
like, "Can I please come to your Walmart?" And I'm like, "I locked the door. I'm really sorry."
Trying to keep those zombies out.
Yeah, you cannot be trusted. How I know you haven't been scratched by a zombie.
You wouldn't spend a week in an aquarium? It's 1
Who's
week.
taking care of everything?
I got
and
you,
the
yeah,
aquarium
yeah.
doesn't have like any cool stuff, like any like food, any.
The ice rink? I feel like 20 minutes of ice skating and you're done. Like,
Yeah,
for
an
at
ice
least a
rink. I wouldn't
decade.
even spend a day in an ice rink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, those shitty nachos they give you with the little pump cheese.
That's what's at the movie theater.
No. I don't know what kind of movie theater you're going, but I'm going to the VIP with the
With
pool.
nobody there to serve you.
Yeah, that does suck.
You're gonna really wish you had come with me. I know it.
At Costco.
Costco is not the same.
No.
Plus Costco has a lot of fish. It would start to smell.
Yeah.
At least at Walmart, there's like,
The food's a little more preserved.
yeah.
Cool. End of podcast.